Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Making Better Strategy. Now, if this is the first time that you're here, Making Better Strategy is a series of webinars, LinkedIn Lives, YouTube videos, podcasts, where we talk about everything CEOs need to know about making better winning strategies in a fresh and pragmatic way. Now, if you don't know me yet, my name is Mark Snoekers. I've been working with CEOs and leadership teams, helping them to design and execute winning strategies for the past 20 plus years. Written a couple of books on the topic, have done research on the topic, and I've worked pretty much all over the world with, here is an example of companies. Very often I work with business units and local organizations within these companies. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, please be invited to check out my website at snoekers.com. Now, enough about me. I'd like to hear a little bit about you. I want to see who is here with us today. So if you could just be so kind to put into the chat, put into the comments where you are joining us from, what you do in life, that would be really nice. And I'll give you a couple of seconds, a couple of moments to start doing that. Now, my goal for this session here today is to actually challenge your thinking about strategy and strategy execution. So maybe not everything that I will be talking about is going to be resonating with you immediately, but I invite you to particularly pay attention to the things that maybe don't resonate so well with you and reflect upon why that is actually the case, because usually these are the things that help you to understand better your mental models and help you understand how you can actually make better strategy, or what are your personal pitfalls that you fall into when it comes to making better strategy. And a little bit of a disclaimer. So I will not talk about the traditional strategic planning today. So I'm not going to talk about cascading strategy into 3 to 5 year plans, financial forecasts based on these plans, translating strategy into budgets, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not saying that these things are not important. So if you do the more, what I would call traditional strategic planning, and if it is working really well for you, then by all means, keep on doing that. And whatever I'm going to talk about can very well be done on top of this traditional approach to strategic planning, let's say. On the other hand, I would also challenge you maybe a little bit to think about and actually challenge whether all these traditional things that you might be doing in your organizations actually provide value. My observation is that a lot of my clients who come to me, they say that despite doing all of that traditional strategic planning, they challenge, or they have challenged it when it comes to strategy execution, and that strategy execution is not going all too well for them. And that's why I present different approaches, maybe that, again, might be challenging for some of you, but in my experience and in my work, they have proven to accelerate strategy execution and improve the results that you get of strategy execution dramatically. Now, what are we going to do today? So I'm going to start a little bit with talking about what is the core challenge of strategy execution. And I'm going to also invite you to provide some of your challenges. So if you are, you want to think about that and you want to put those challenges already into the comments, that's really cool, so we can discuss about them. Then I'm going to talk about the 7 pitfalls and how to avoid them. So if we talk about the core challenge of strategy execution, there are 7 pitfalls that are kind of leading, or the root cause leading to the core challenge. And we're going to talk about those, and I'm going to show you what you can do to avoid them. And then we're going to kind of move into the ultimate goal. What I call the ultimate goal is of strategy execution, or strategy overall, is to really actually be living your strategy and be living strategy. And to finish it off, I'm going to show you my strategy launchpad methodology. And what we're going to talk about today is actually part of that overall methodology to designing and executing winning strategies. And then at the end, we're also going to have some time for your questions, and hopefully I can provide some answers. Now, if you have questions along the way, just put them into the comments, so I can go back to them and I can have a look at them. And yeah, just to answer the most important question right away. So yes, you will get the slides, and I'll show you how at the end of our LinkedIn Live, and you also will get the recording. Obviously, the recording of the LinkedIn Lives stays on LinkedIn. Good. So let's start with the core challenge of successful strategy execution. And I'm actually interested in hearing also from you. So if you think about strategy execution in your organizations, in your companies, maybe in your teams, functions, departments, your area of responsibility, if you like, what is or what are the top three, let's say, challenges that you face? Again, I'm going to give you a moment to just put those into the chat. I'll have a look here. So let's just keep them coming. And while you do that, I'm going to present some research that has been done. So here is a very new study by Gartner, so very fresh. It's from 2023, actually, so from this year, where they looked into what is the difference between those companies that are actually good at strategy execution and those who are not good at strategy execution. And they have identified these three key challenges. So on the one hand, it's about having a clear strategy in the first place. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Not only having a clear strategy, but having what has been called good strategy, or what I call a better strategy. It's kind of a prerequisite to be able to implement anything. And then they talk about three common barriers, so the ambiguous responsibility, so not being clear about who has to do what, the inability to cascade objectives to team and individuals. That's something that I will be talking about, how to avoid actually that pitfall. And I would even challenge this cascade objectives. That's one of the pitfalls that I see. And then the third one here is lack of clear priorities. And then also something that we will be talking about is this idea of becoming more adaptive and having a more agile strategy, maybe, which they call here recalibrate and adjust execution plans in response to stuff that is actually happening around you. Right? And if I look at some of your comments, so yeah, you have some of these things here, competing priorities, getting alignment. Not everybody understands what strategy is. Yeah, so that's also something that I do a lot in my work, actually, is that before we start a strategy engagement, we actually talk about what is strategy and we align on a common definition. So that's an additional pitfall actually to fall into. Thinking outside the box, yeah, identifying, prioritizing resources required to deliver the strategy. Yeah, so we also want to talk about this idea of how to align resources, mechanics, strategies from up there, not for us. Yeah, so that's also something we're going to be talking about. Cool. Yeah, so lots of challenges that you mentioned, and just to put you at ease, I mean, these are not all out of the ordinary, so it's the usual stuff that you see over. Now, if we have to summarize all the things that we're talking about, or what I see is the core challenge of strategy execution is, in my experience, this perceived gap between strategy and daily business. Some of you talked about the alignment, you talked about resources that need to be assigned. You talked about, well, it's something that's for guys up there, but it's not really for us. Now, at the end of the day, obviously, strategy should be daily business. So some people would even go as far and then say that whatever you do in your daily business, that's actually your strategy, no matter what you might have defined as your strategy. As a good example might be your strategy might say that you need to go after a new customer segment, you need to enter a new market, but daily business is you don't talk to any of these customers. So then you have your strategy on paper, but what you're doing in daily business is obviously not aligned to your strategy. And then you might say, well, do we really have that strategy, or is what we are doing on a daily basis actually our strategy? So that for me is the core challenge, to bring these two things together and to get out of this. Well, we have strategy and it's seen as something on top of daily business. I have my daily business. I don't have time for strategy because we are so busy in the daily business. That needs to stop, and your strategy needs to be daily business. Now, the question obviously is how to close the gap, and you can start closing that gap by actually avoiding the 7 pitfalls that I observe most commonly in my work, and that I work with companies to kind of avoid by how we do strategy. Now, the first pitfall is, and some of you, I think, have some challenges already going in that kind of direction, is developing the strategy, designing your strategy behind closed boardroom doors. So I guess you all know that you have guys up there who are busy working on the strategy, and then at some point the strategy will be announced and communicated, and then the company has to do it. And some of you talked about resistance to change, for example, and this is one of the key reasons why you have that resistance to change. Right? If you don't involve the people into making strategy, then obviously you cannot really expect them to be committed. You cannot really expect them to implement them, because the days of just do as you're being told are definitely over, and people want to work for companies where they also can be more engaged and involved and have a say. Now, on the other hand, you probably can't involve the whole organization, or you shouldn't ask the whole organization, what is our strategy, or what is my strategy supposed to be? I remember, and you might have seen the post on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, when I was very young. I had a client who was a small 100-person organization, and I was very eager to involve everybody to the strategy process. And the owner of the company at the time, he said, well, I'm not going to ask my 20-year-old accountant who's only been with us for 2 months what the strategy of my business should be. I've been doing this for 10 years. I know the industry. I know the business. And he had a good point, but at the same time, she might also have had good ideas. So over the years, I developed these 6 ways on how you can involve important stakeholders, important people into the strategy process, but still kind of the final decision making stays with the leaders. But you're opening up the process and inviting input from everybody. And this kind of input, I like to organize or think around it in 6 different ways, or 6 different dimensions. Now, the first one is that if you're thinking about strategy, and my view of strategy is that strategy is always a response to the challenges that keep you from achieving your ambitions. That is, it's not just a plan. Or if there's no challenge, you don't really need a strategy. So strategy is the response to the challenges to achieve your ambitions. So you can ask the organization, you can ask relevant stakeholders about what are the challenges that they are seeing on a daily basis, and what might also be highest value opportunities. I call it the opportunities they see that you can seize and that can help you to achieve your ambitions. Obviously, once then you have collected that, it's up to leadership to define what are the core really challenges that we think we should be focusing on, or what are the big opportunities that we should be focusing on that help us. And once you have done that, again, you can get ideas and solutions from throughout the organization on how to overcome the challenges and how to seize the opportunities. Once you have the strategy, I would advise you to seek feedback from the organization on the strategy. So that's like doing a lot. So we always develop a first draft, and we deliberately call it a first draft, which we then put out, and we invite relevant stakeholders, or maybe even the whole organization. So it depends a little bit, but it goes as far as inviting the whole organization into providing feedback on the strategy. So very practically, what I just recently did with an organization of some 3,000 people, we organized 2-hour workshops. We had some where we, as I said, invited specific stakeholder groups that we thought would be very important to get their view and their input on the strategy. And we also had sessions that we just opened up to everybody from throughout the organization, so where people could come. We presented the strategy. We always said this is a draft, and we'd like to have your feedback. And then we ask questions like, what do you like about this strategy? What don't you like about this strategy? What is clear? What is maybe unclear? What topics do we need to elaborate on? What concerns do you have about implementation? What will be difficult when it comes to implementing this? What will be easy when it comes to implementing this? So all doing these kind of things increases immensely the commitment and the buy-in and the engagement that you get from people throughout the organization. And it kind of links also to my fourth point here, inquire about the crucial aspects and concerns that people might have about the successful implementation, so that when you then announce the strategy, remember this is just a draft, so we update it afterwards, and then once you announce the strategy, you can address all these things already up front. People see that you have involved them, that you listen to them, and then they are more willing and more likely to actually go with this. Then, when it comes to the implementation specifically, it's also about appropriating the specifics. So what I mean by that is that from the top, if you like, we define strategic directions and priorities. So we could say the why and the what are we doing, but then we also involve the organization, obviously, in appropriating the details and the specifics, how we're going to do it, what we're going to do it. So it's not about defining everything, every small little detail. That's also why I say I'm not talking about planning every detail for the next 3 to 5 years, but it's really more about strategy is the rule, the response to that challenge. As I said, it's some people have called it the guiding policy, but then the details, they will be co-created with the organization, and by involving the people again, you're going to increase the likelihood of successful implementation. And then it's also about involving everybody, reviewing the strategy. How is it working? Is it working? What is working? What is not working? And also in the progress that you are making. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that with one of the other pitfalls. So, second pitfall, and again, some of you alluded already to that, lofty vision statements and fuzzy goals. So, not really being very clear about the strategy. What is the strategy? What are really the priorities that you want to focus on? And here it's really about defining as a leadership team what is important. What are really the things that we need to focus on? And as I said, it's about obviously defining or deciding on the strategy. And again, I define strategy as the response to the challenges that keep you from reaching your ambitions. And then you need to focus the organization on the challenges and the opportunities, ideally, that also can be addressed in the next 12 to 18 months. So if you have a lot of challenges currently, if your organization faces a lot of challenges, there is no use in talking about stuff that you will be doing in 3 years, because everybody will be so in the trenches and everybody will be so much into, well, but this is the daily business. We have daily problems, so don't talk to us about stuff that is only going to happen in the next 3 years. Also, that's why you want to zoom out into the future, but then that's your ambition. But then you want to zoom back into today and focus on the challenges and opportunities that you can address in the next 12 to 18 months, which is all about then setting the direction. So find how you're going to address these challenges, how you're going to seize the opportunities, provide the broad direction, as I said. You need to prioritize what is essential and what is not. And I would always prefer, if you want to implement something, so the priorities, try to think about what can you actually do as or within business as usual. So again, to close this gap between strategy and daily business, you need to think about what of your priorities, your strategic priorities, can actually be done in the organization as business as usual. And it does not require special initiative, so to say. Because a special initiative or strategic initiative or a program or a project will always be perceived as something that comes on top of daily business. So try to use the daily business whenever possible, and use strategic initiatives only sparingly for very extraordinary things or situations where it's something that impacts the whole organization, or something that you think the organization is not capable of doing yet, and we need to support it. And for that, obviously, you want to put in place a proper project organization that can deal with these initiatives, that can steer the initiatives by involving, through involving also the rest of the organization. But ideally, it's more about focusing on the internal capacities, building these capabilities, than outsourcing that to done for you consultants. And here is a tool that I use for prioritization of challenges, opportunities, but also strategic initiatives and moves. So it's quite easy to two by two matrix, and we look at, does it impact the survival of our organization or not, and does it actually impact the entire organization or only a part of the organization? And then we give priority to things that threaten the survival of the organization. So that's the most important things that we need to address first, and that concern actually the entire organization. So that's always a priority. And then you move around, you stay with what threatens the survival, but it might only impact a part of the organization. And then you move to things that are not so threatening to the survival. And then again, entire organization before parts of the organization. So as an example, if one of your challenges is to, I don't know, automate some processes in finance, doesn't really threaten the survival of the organization, it only impacts a part of the organization. So that's really something that you should deprioritize versus cash flow problems, for example, which threaten the survival and they impact at least multiple areas in the organization, from sales to working capital management, so finance is involved, logistics and supply chain, and so on and so forth. So this is an easy tool that we use quite a lot to prioritize challenges, opportunities, but also strategic initiatives. Pitfall number 3, the strategy roadshow. And I guess everybody who's been at least in a large organization is very well aware of these things. So strategy roadshow, the CEO travels around departments, teams, even locations, maybe worldwide, announcing what the strategy is. Then they kind of leave it at that. So they just communicated once, but then they don't really, they're not really involved anymore beyond that. And actually, you need to think about, it's not enough to just announce it. You need to think about, how are you going to support strategy execution, and what is actually required to build the capabilities that you need. So you need to think about how are you going to support the organization? How are you going to enable the people? And for me, enablement is always more important than this done for you and controlling. So really done for you, I mean, so you hire somebody external to actually do it. So you want to prioritize again, first and foremost, time permits and your resources permit, to enable the people in the organization so that you can build the capabilities that you need for strategy in the future. And also something very important here, I called it the required bandwidth. So if you ask people to work on strategic initiatives on top of the business as usual, so all the strategy stuff that cannot be done as business as usual, then you also need to make sure that you align or you assign the required bandwidth, so give people the capacity and the capabilities to actually work on the strategy. And what we often do, especially if the organization is a little bit larger, we set up a strategy support team, which is in charge of training people on the strategy, facilitate workshops on how to execute the strategy in a particular area, who takes charge of communication, facilitates sessions with the leaders, and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk more about what kind of sessions in a couple of minutes. Next pitfall, cascading only KPIs. So as I said before, cascading KPIs with the traditional planning of KPIs and objectives throughout the organization, that's maybe important, and if it helps you, then you should do it, but it's not enough to only cascade KPIs. Why is that? Well, because if you only cascade KPIs, it doesn't really mean that people adjust their behavior to it. So if you say, well, sales is a typical KPI, but if you just assign a new sales target, it doesn't actually necessarily mean that it's coming from the new market you want to address or the new products that you want to sell. So instead of only cascading KPIs, I prefer to align activities. So what I mean by aligning activities is that you're really in the different teams, departments, functions of the organization, you think about, how do we need to change what we do on a daily basis to be aligned to the overall strategy. So as an example, I'm just working with a client now, and one of the core strategic challenges is talent. Many companies face that at the moment, and everybody agrees that the focus needs to shift from recruiting people externally to developing people internally. So talent management becomes much more important than talent recruiting. So aligning the activities of HR to this new strategic priority of talent management means that you need to look at what are the activities that HR is currently doing, and if 50% of your time is allocated to recruiting and only 10% of your time is allocated to talent management, then your activities, how you spend your time, how you spend your resources, what you do on a daily basis in your team is not aligned to the strategy. And that's where then you need to shift, you need to deprioritize talent recruiting in this case, in this example, and you need to emphasize and move, shift the people and the time and the resources over to talent management. And only, and very often we talk about allocating resources. Now, it's a good case where if you were to allocate more resources to HR, that doesn't necessarily mean that these resources will actually also be allocated to talent management, but they might be allocated to recruiting instead. And only by going to that granular level of talking about what are the activities and where do people spend actually their time, and shifting that and aligning that to the strategy is going to make sure that you're actually working on the strategy and that you're using the resources aligned to strategy. And what I like to do is, some of you might be familiar with the Roger Martin Playing to Win strategy cascade, and I like using that on a company level. And then we have a slightly updated or modified version, I would say, that I use on a function, department, and team level. We talk about, so what is our ambition? So that kind of stays the same. I don't talk about a winning aspiration here, like in the original model, because for a company or for a team like HR, or maybe for a team like finance, winning aspiration doesn't resonate. So we talk about ambitions, and then the where to play becomes where will we focus. And here we focus on these activities. So we focus on looking at the activities that the company or the team needs to focus on. How will we win becomes how will we add value. So what is really the value proposition that you're delivering to your internal stakeholders, and how you're going to add value to the company strategy. And then capabilities and management systems is exactly the same, like on the overall company strategy. So what you need. So again, my example here is you might need more capabilities when it comes to talent management and less capabilities when it comes to recruiting. And then systems is about how are you going to implement your strategy and how you're going to track your strategy implementation. We'll talk about that shortly. Actually, the next slide, the next pitfall is about that, tracking only KPIs. So yeah, it's something that happens very often. So you have cascaded all your KPIs throughout your organization, and then what you do is you're controlling, you're tracking the KPIs on a monthly, quarterly basis. Now, I would invite you to go beyond just tracking KPIs. I'm not saying it's not important to track the KPIs, but to focus more on strategic conversations. So in my experience, strategic conversations are much more important, because this is where you learn about what is actually happening, what is working, what is not working, what are we doing, what are we not doing, and so on. Right? So the focus is more about feedback, and it's less about the controlling aspect or the monitoring aspect of tracking KPIs. And what should you be discussing in these strategic conversations is, first of all, action. So that I mean, are we doing what we committed to do? So if we said, let's take with my example of HR, we focus more on talent management than talent recruiting. Is this actually what we are doing? So action, the action aligned to what we committed to. Results. This is really then, again, it goes back to tracking the KPIs, but it's also about just qualitatively, do we have a feeling that the strategy is actually working? Is it leading to the results that we were hoping to see when we designed the strategy? Then insights. So are there any new insights coming up? Are our assumptions, the hypothesis that we had when we designed the strategy, still valid, or do we need to adjust the strategy? Any new insights, new ideas, opportunities that you should be thinking about? And then finally, I would always ask about what's the spirit, what's the mood regarding our strategy? So is everybody still confident? Is everybody still committed? Do people start to have concerns about the strategy? Do they start to challenge the strategy, or are they still full of energy to go for it? And then you can always ask us know why, what are the issues, problems, bottleneck, keeping us from doing the actions, achieving the results, and are there any ideas on how to overcome them? And I just see that, Jay, so how do you measure strategic conversations? Well, you're having the strategic conversations, and I'll present you in a couple of slides an overview of how to do that. Now, here is, for example, how I do that on a team level. So on the team level, we set up this table, this form, where on the one hand, we have the strategic priorities, which are defined by the overall strategy, and then we have the team define what are our ambitions aligned to these strategic priorities, what are the barriers that we currently see, again, that keep us from achieving these ambitions, and what are the three next actions that we work on to remove those barriers. So we use that, we ask teams to do that, and then in terms of measuring strategic conversations, so we go back to these things. And if the organization is a little bit larger, then we aggregate also the barriers across departments and teams. So to have a discussion on a higher level, what are the big themes that we see emerge from throughout the organization that you need to focus on. And then obviously you have, again, specific actions that you can track on a monthly basis, for example. This is how we measure strategic conversations, if you like. Number 6, hands-off leadership. So again, it goes a little bit back to the strategy roadshow as well. So this idea of, just throwing the strategy over the fence and then thinking that all of this stuff and even all the stuff that I've just been talking about will just magically somehow happen. And obviously that's very often not the case. So instead of doing that, leadership needs to take ownership of the strategy. So again, it's not about outsourcing it. It's not about outsourcing it to an external provider who can help you with that, a consultant or whatever. And it's even not about outsourcing to a strategic management team internally. Right? So they can help, they can support, they can facilitate all of these things. They can prepare important meetings and stuff. But leadership needs to be heavily involved and needs to take ownership. And again, it's about setting direction, about aligning the organization so that you focus on the priorities and the moves, and you transform the conditions that are actually keeping you from achieving your strategy using the information, for example, that you collected in these team feedbacks above. And through the strategic conversations, you want to create strategic leaders everywhere. So you can continuously ask everybody, so what is your contribution to the strategy? What are you doing, and what's keeping you from doing it? And now how can I help you? And to formalize this, so going back to this question about how to measure strategic conversations, so to formalize this whole approach, I have what I call a strategy activation architecture. So here is an example. It's probably way too small to see all the details. I'll explain it, and you can go back to it in the slides to see the details. But what we want to do here is, on the left-hand side, to see dimensions. So we talk about steering. So this is the leadership responsibility. Then the second yellowish box here is about initiatives. So we want to plan, steer, support strategic initiatives. In this case, this is a real-life example from a client of mine. Then we have the alignment that I spoke about, so on the department and team level. Then we had some overall communication for the entire organization. And we have the evaluation on the bottom, where we did a little bit more formal, more substantial evaluations across the entire company. Now, what you see on the top now, you have on the very top the black boxes that shows months, and then you have the core components. So here we had a kickoff with leadership, where we involved also the next level of leaders more substantially in the strategy, doing a workshop, talking about their feedback on the strategy, concerns they might have, and so on and so forth. Right? And then you have monthly meetings. So it's monthly strategy review meetings where the leadership team and an extended strategy team actually gets together to discuss and have some of these strategic conversations that I was talking about. And on the next level, you have initiatives. So here we set up a strategy support team which supports these initiatives. We had a kickoff with all the initiatives. Actually, in this case, we did at the end of the day, we did one kickoff with all the initiatives. We had like 60, 70 people in the workshop. We have broken them up into the various initiatives. And then you see, again, the strategic conversation. So these black lines there strategic conversations that are happening on a monthly basis across the initiative. So the support team does that, which then is also feeded back up into the leadership level. Then we have the alignment. So here we actually prioritize a couple of departments. So again, using that kind of matrix, if you like, we thought about who is most in need of a change of their strategy, if you like, on the department and team level. So we prioritized a couple of departments. HR was one of them, IT was one of them, and a larger operational department was part of them. And there where we supported these teams in developing their local functional department strategies. And again, obviously that was presented to the strategy team on top. And then we have a larger quarterly review here. So initiatives, we do monthly reviews. So we have these monthly strategic conversations, but on the team level here, we went for a quarterly review. Then you have in the communication, so you had a roadshow. So we did a roadshow, but then we keep on informing people through various means. And on the bottom, you have evaluation. And here the evaluation actually focuses on two things again. So one is, are we achieving the results we wanted to see? One of the KPIs here is NPS. So we used NPS for clients, but also for employees, and then NPS, so a Net Promoter Score for partners. So we're measuring the results here. We did it at the beginning to have kind of baseline, and then we keep on repeating that in a 6-month cycle. And we also have the little red dot that you see here on the bottom. That's a sounding board. So this is more focused on evaluating or have a conversation about the spirit in the organization. So the sounding board is just like a cross-functional mix of people from all over the organization. We get them together and we discuss mostly spirit, what is working well with the strategy, what could be improved, and so on and so forth. And all of these things, again, are being cascaded up, if you like, to a review across initiatives and then a review across the entire strategy. So that's how leadership kind of orchestrates all the strategy work that is going on in this organization. And we have set up these containers, if you like, to have strategic conversations throughout the entire organization. And the last pitfall actually is first design, then execute. Now, this might be a challenge to some of you, but going away from this idea that first you design a strategy and then you execute the strategy. What I see a lot is that strategies these days, it needs to be a lot more adaptive, it needs to be a lot more iterative. In some cases, you need to act before you actually know what you can design. I know it sounds very counterintuitive, but it's a living thing, and it's not something that you first design and then execute. So you kind of need to go away from this Chevron style strategy where you go through these steps and you can kind of check the boxes with one thing, and then you move on to the next. Strategy is a lot more iterative, it's a lot more chaotic than what we learn actually in business school and what we think it should be according to these kind of steps, typical steps that you see. And it also doesn't help if you put this into a circle. I'm very sorry, but that doesn't make it any more agile. So the other day, I listened to a webinar where they were talking about agile strategy and how their software actually helps agile strategy or enables agile strategy. And then they were talking, some companies were talking about how they do it. But at the end of the day, what they were doing is they have a 3 to 5 year forecast, and they do quarterly updates of that forecast. So it's planning, kind of rolling planning. That's not really agile strategy. It's a typical strategy, and you're doing what you always did. You update your financials, you update your goals on a 3 or 6 or 12-month basis, but that doesn't make it agile. So you can call it whatever you want, but just putting it into a circle doesn't really make it agile. And actually, if you want to learn more about this idea of design while executing while you're still designing, I invite you to the next LinkedIn Live, which I'm having with Peter Combo, who wrote a fantastic book actually on the emergent approach to strategy. And we will be talking a lot about why this traditional linear strategic planning and also the cascading of KPIs and all these things don't really work, and obviously what to do instead. And if you go to synthesis.com/learn, you'll see a couple of other webinars and initiatives that you can join. Now, if you don't do the linear style, what else? What does it mean to actually be designing while you are executing and so on and so forth? Now, at the end of the day, strategy on the mind of the strategist, as sometimes I say, is about these three questions. It's always about asking, what is the problem? What's keeping us from reaching our ambitions? How should the problem be addressed? What's the response that we put out there? And what actions should be taken and how should we execute it? So, and what you want to achieve is that these things are happening constantly in your organization. Right? And that's where the strategic conversations again come into play. Or this is where you actually do this on an ongoing basis. And the ultimate goal of doing that is that you should be living, and I say your strategy here in brackets because it's about living your strategy, but it's also just about living strategy. And so if you want to go into a mode where it's not from, or you move from think then do into thinking while doing. So this allows you to be adaptive. This allows you to update your strategy constantly as needed. I'm not saying that you should change your strategy every month or every quarter or every 12 months, whatever. You have your ambitions, or you move forward, you make progress towards your ambitions by solving the first challenge. But how you need to do that, that's where you need to maybe adapt, and that's where you need to think while doing, and you need to do while maybe still thinking. And as you do that, you go through these cycles, these iterative cycles of doing something, making sense of what's happening, making decisions on how to respond, and then again you take action. The results of the actions you're taking like actually feed into the next loop of making sense and making decisions again. So at the end of the day, really make strategy everybody's job every day. So that's really closing the gap that I spoke about at the beginning between strategy and daily business. I have a methodology that helps actually with the specific actions and the planning, and also enables this iterative work. I call it 90-21-7. So the idea is that you have 90 outcomes that you define, and then you break that down into intermediary outcomes or results for sprints, so 4 sprints of 21 days, so 4 times 21 days, so 4 times 3 weeks, if you like. And then you define the first 7 days of activities, and then you move on. Have OKRs. This is also a good way to, you can use the OKRs actually as part of the outcomes and the key results that you want to achieve. But then again, it's about the activities that you also will take to move you towards it. And if you'd like to learn more about this, you can go to stress.com/90-21-7. It's going to take you to a platform where there is a short course where I talk about the methodology. You can download the template. I explain a little bit the history behind how I came up with this and why I actually developed this approach in the first place. Now, so we've been talking about activating your strategy today. Also, this is kind of the summary, the key principles that I spoke about that will enable you to actually make strategy everybody's job. And this is only part of the overall approach, which I call the strategy launchpad. So strategy launchpad actually, so there is activating, so there is the doing, which is really important. Then there is this idea of making sense of what's going on. So what's going on in your industry, your market, what's going on with your strategy, what's going on with your organization. I would actually say that in my experience, 60-70% of why your strategy is not working has more to do with your internal organization than with outside competition. So very often we focus on these things. And in between, you have the strategy review. So that top line that I showed you in the architecture before, which helps you to make the connection between the activities you're doing and making sense of that. And then once you do that, you also need to go into obviously designing your strategy, updating your strategy, refining your strategy. And here, the link between these things is also under making sense. You want to define the strategic challenges and opportunities that you want to work on, and then design the strategies, how you're going to solve the challenges, how you're going to seize the opportunities. And the link between the activation and the design is the strategic moves, the strategic priorities that you need to define. Now, I'm deliberately presenting this as these spaces or circles, if you like, because again, it's not a linear process. In some cases, you have an idea So you are already on the designing your strategy, for example. But then maybe you need to go back to making sense to figure out whether it's a good idea or not. You need to activate some parts of it because you want to validate it, and then you do the strategy review. Again, think about what needs to be updated, what is working, what is not working. In all likelihood, unless you are a startup starting or beginning on a clean state, you have already strategy in place. So it starts actually with that review, and you complement that with this idea of making sense, and then you move into the design. And again, it's not about, I don't want to present it as a linear 1, 2, 3, and so on steps, because at the end of the day, it is about doing all these things constantly. So you always in these spaces, and while some of the organization is activating, some other part of the organization leadership might already be in a new cycle of making sense and designing. And only by doing all these activities constantly will you actually move into living your strategy and actually turning your strategy always on. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this, again, I would invite you to reach out, go to snickers.com/work, where you find more information about if you want to work with me on these things, but you also find downloads that explain this always on strategy and strategy launchpad in more detail. Good. So to just sum it up, there are 8 shifts that I propose for making better strategy. So on the left, you see what I call old school traditional approaches to strategy, which very often what I observe is lots of financial targets and lofty vision statements, but not real strategy. 3 to 5 year plans that usually are cascaded and with objectives and KPIs and so on. Lots of benchmarking, best practices, following what competitors are doing. It's done once a year, usually outside and not kind of always on. There is the think, then do, working behind closed boardroom doors that we talked about. Usually lots of analytics in PowerPoint, so I still see these 100, 200 pages or slides of PowerPoints. And very often also it's outsourced to done-for-you consultants. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't work with consultants, but it's not about giving them the responsibility for the strategy, which is a little bit of a paradox, I think. I would say that strategy is the most important thing when it comes to a successful business, and then we outsource that to somebody else. Now, I learned in business school that you should only outsource stuff that is not crucial, and here I'm actually outsourcing that. So to the new rules of strategy, so you focus on your most critical challenges and highest value opportunities, which can be addressed in the next 12 to 18 months. You want to put innovation back into strategy instead of copying what others are doing. We want to turn it always on. You want to think why you're doing, involve relevant stakeholders, which could be internal, external partners, customers, and so on. Right? You engage people in the conversations instead of relying on all the analytics PowerPoint, and you take ownership. Good. So that was a lot of me talking. So I always like to provide a lot of input, a lot of stuff. Now we still have about 10 minutes, 12 minutes for questions. So let me just briefly look at a couple of them here. Just the last one is, yeah, where is the customer? Well, the customer is in the providing feedback. Sometimes we also had customers in these feedback sessions. Obviously, when we make sense of what's going on. So there I talked about the market. I think about the market is also including the customers that you need to think about. When we talked about the evaluation, and in the case that I presented, it was about net promoter score. So that's where we asked the customer again to provide feedback on whether we are actually improving our net promoter score or not. So another one, let's say, so a question around chief strategy officers have a playbook for strategy, what works and what doesn't. Well, so what I talked about, that's what works for me in real life situations and what works for my clients. And talking about chief strategy officers, so yes, I also do have a couple of clients where I work with the chief strategy officer because they say, well, we don't want to outsource it anymore. We want to do it ourselves, but we want somebody who helps us with structuring the process, facilitating the strategic conversations, asking the right questions, providing the methodologies, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the key reasons. And the second key reason is that they say we don't want to have all these analytics done up front. So we don't just do analytics upfront for the sake of doing analytics, but we do analytics throughout the process whenever we need them. So if we need some information, some data analysis on a particular aspect, or profitability of a project or a market or these things, that's when we do analytics, but only as part of the process in the moment when we actually need it to be able to make a decision, that be able to move on. So we don't just do a lot of analysis because we want to have a lot of analysis. No, there's always a purpose behind. What's your opinion of strategy done in-house versus outsourced? So as I said, you should have, leadership needs to take responsibility for the strategy. So you need to be in charge. What I would outsource, or where I would hire a consultant. So first of all, my work is a consultant is facilitate that process, organize that process, facilitate the strategic conversations in the workshops, making sure that we progress with strategy design and also execution. And then you might need specialized expertise here and there throughout the process. So for example, you might need market research. We're talking again about customer voice. And so that's where you might hire a consultant to do market research. You might need research on or extended analysis on an industry or a particular region. Again, that's something where you can actually hire somebody to provide that. I've worked with clients who didn't have the resources, meaning they didn't have the time to do extended financial analysis, but we needed the analysis to be able to move forward. So we hired an external consultant to help with that analysis. So not saying you shouldn't work with a consultant, but I think it's to me, just again, it's this understandable, this paradox of how you can outsource something so important to somebody who has no stake in your business. Frequency of strategy review. It depends a little bit on the industry and the dynamics of the industry, but I like to do it on a monthly basis, kind of having these conversations that I said, and then larger ones maybe after 6 months, after 12 months. But it really depends on the dynamics of the situation. I have a client actually who does these review meetings that I talk about on a weekly basis. Every Monday at 12, I think it is, or every Tuesday at 12, we have a strategy review meeting. How long does it take to do strategic planning? Well, so yeah, so first of all, I wouldn't do the traditional strategic planning. And what I presented you, so this strategy launch pad. So if we do this in a series of workshops, so going through the understanding phase, going through a couple of workshops to design the strategy, and then have some validation in between, and then think about how are we going to implement this, how are we going to activate it and involve the organization more and more. Typically, I would say for a company of starting with 200 people, maybe also some medium-sized company, about 12 weeks. So 3 months usually is enough to go through these steps and start already the implementation. Then obviously this turning it always on then afterwards takes a little bit more time. Let's see, what else do we have here? It's just about this strategic conversations. What about having the right incentives to ensure a balanced strategy are weighted properly? Yeah, so again, as I said, business as usual should be the strategy. And then if you feel like you need new KPIs that are more aligned with the strategy, then obviously that's also part of the management systems. So the idea of we're going to actually implement the strategy and track the results of the strategy. So very often forgotten. So very often we don't think about updating KPIs or just changing KPIs to make them be aligned to the new strategy. My approach assumes the organization has mindset, knowledge, capabilities to understand, reflect, and critique strategy. Right. Well, I mean, it's really. I don't think you need a lot of strategy knowledge in that sense, strategy theoretical knowledge to be able to say, well, I think this strategy is going to work, or what are the challenges that I see as an employee from an implementation perspective. Right? So I think that is very well. Everybody are very capable of doing that. Obviously, you also need to make a little bit of a judgment of whether you do everything. I mean, you're not going to be able to do everything in the first hand that people tell you, but whether you listen to some things or not, right? And it's more about the recurring themes, and it's more about the feeling you get from listening to all the feedback that will help you to improve the strategy. Just the other day, we did such a review workshop, and we had the head of security was in one of these sessions, and he said that how to win the differentiating factor should be around data security. And while I agree that data security is very important for that particular industry specifically or especially, that's not how you're going to win customers. They're not going to come to you just because you have the best data security if the rest of you are crap. Right? So it's about who do you listen to and about making a judgment whether feedback is also worth considering or maybe not so much. Red teams, yeah. So Matt, that's something you can also do, right? So you can take a red team approach to working on the strategy or challenging the strategy. Just briefly looking at any. So yeah, Nixon. Yeah, it's not only about measuring action; it's also about measuring results, as I said. So it's about measuring effectiveness, but very often we forget to measure the action in the first place. So again, it's about communicating the strategy. It's about cascading objectives, and then we wonder why we don't achieve objectives, but we never do what we actually committed to doing. So that's why I say it's not either or, but you need to actually look at both. Good. I think I covered most of the questions. If you have any more questions, just add them to the comments here. So even after the LinkedIn Live, I will go back to them. I will go through it, and if I see anything interesting that I can help you with, I obviously put a comment there. So to close it off, I promise you that you can get the slides. So the recording, obviously, it will live here on LinkedIn, so you can go back to this. If you want the slides, head over to snookers.com/execution slides, and then you can download the slides that I just presented to you today. And remember, also next LinkedIn Live is in 2 weeks with Peter Combo. So we'll talk again a lot about this idea of emergent strategy, agile strategy, adaptable strategy. So that's if you're interested in that, then please don't hesitate to join us there. If you'd like to work with me, learn more about my work, then head over to snookers.com/work or reach out here on LinkedIn. And with that, thank you for your attention. I hope it was valuable. If it was, please leave some comments, share it with your friends and colleagues. If it was not valuable, also leave some comments, tell me what I could improve. And with that, so see you next time. And in the meantime, make the shift to better strategy. See you. Bye.